Hello everyone and welcome to chapter 18 part 3 conservation. Now before we start this particular part, I just want to say that conversations about conservation, that's really hard to say, um, is very complex and it's not like very simple. So when you learn this chapter, I really hope that you're not looking at the slides as something to just memorize and commit to memory, but to see the importance of how important conservation is and see the need for it and see how we can solve things. Now even in the exam, they don't really ask you factual questions. They would show you maybe an organism like this is Sumatran rhinos, and ask you what you think are the threats that they face and maybe what are the steps you can use to conserve this species. So it's not just like a factual thing, it is a conceptual thing. And I hope this really improves your general knowledge. Obviously my slides is not the end all and be all. Please feel free to do more reading, and not just during your A-levels, but to be more conscious about the environment as you become a responsible citizen of Malaysia and of the world. Okay, anyways, so let's start part 3A. Today we're going to be covering the need to maintain biodiversity, the role of NGOs, and the threats to biodiversity. And next video we're going to do two of this. I just want to point out that this particular slides are color coded. So NGO, the heading will be in green, threats, the heading is in yellow, orange, and blue, so on and so forth. So the header color changes, just so it's aesthetically pleasing and it's easy to refer to. Anyways, let's start with the need to maintain biodiversity. There are 4 main reasons here. Okay, number 1, ecological reasons. Number 2, economic benefits. Number 3, moral or aesthetical reasons, and ethical reasons. And number 4, cultural and aesthetic reasons. So let's explore each one of them. Number 1, ecological reasons. So why maintain biodiversity? The main reason is really to protect the environment and to maintain genetic variation. This is sort of a recap from chapter 17. These points here are quite important because they always come out with all these keywords like avoiding inbreeding depression, decrease in homozygosity, right? These words always show up in the mark scheme. And in the end, high genetic diversity of species will increase the ability of populations to adapt to a changing environment and increase its chance of survival. I'm not going to go into detail here. I'm going to leave the points here in order for you to study. Yeah, because it's just a recap. I just want to point out to you that it's really important. So other than maintaining genetic variation, other reasons why we should protect the environment is because it maintains food webs. If one part of the environment is affected, it is going to have a chain reaction on the entire food web. Not only one species will be affected, but the entire chain. Okay. When we talk about ecosystem and the definition of ecosystem, it is really the interaction between the non-living elements and the living elements of nature, right, in a particular area. And we learn that it's a self-sustaining unit. But once one part is destroyed, it would affect the entire thing, and it might not be sustainable for it to, survive, for different species to survive. So yeah, maintaining food webs. Other than that, you want to keep nutrient cycling going. You want to protect against soil erosion. You want water and mineral retention in the soil itself, and you also want climate stability to prevent natural disasters from happening. So these are a list of reasons. Again, this chapter is complex. There are more reasons than this, but this is what I'm going to cover in my slides. Please feel free to read extra. Now, I guess ecological reasons might not be a good enough reason sometimes to persuade people to really protect the environment, especially when businesses are involved and livelihoods of peoples are involved. But people don't realize when they do not protect the environment that economically we lose out as well. And why is that? In the long term, right, we are actually relying on nature, where be it forests or aquatic environments, we are relying on it for resource material. Think of food, think of wood building, think of fibers for clothes, herbs for medicine, right? We're using a lot of these resources from nature in order to, well, profit and make money and also use. So if we destroy all of that, we might have a problem. Okay, this here is lingzi. It's a Chinese herb which is really expensive, by the way, and it costs a lot of money, and the once in a while are prized possessions. Anyways, resource material, one of the big things. Number two is ecotourism. Now, a lot of tourists actually come to Malaysia to see our beaches. Our islands are actually very, very popular among Angmos, and nowadays even China and Korean tourists and Taiwanese tourists. Yeah, not before COVID, of course. And yeah, they come here to really see our nature. So if our forests and our islands and our marine ecosystem is not properly taken care of, can you imagine how would that affect our tourism? That's crazy. So yeah, there are economic benefits to this as well. Number three, last but not least, scientific research. So scientific research does require a lot of money, but the results of scientific research might be very beneficial towards human beings and can be a business as well. For example, resources and species may have use in the future. For example, medical use. A lot of our medicines are first found in plants, and a lot of Chinese medicine, and actually traditional medicine, not just Chinese, are relying on a lot of medical use, and we can use science to actually maybe take the organism and isolate the compounds necessary to make new drugs, maybe in the future, and you can sell that new drug for money. See? Next example, wild strains may possess gene pool to further improve crops. So our existing crops now may not have as good climate change tolerance, so maybe if the weather gets hotter, it might not survive, but maybe there is a wild strain out there in the forest that is very closely related, or even not closely related, that has the genes available to allow our plants now to grow better at higher temperatures. We never know. So if we destroy it before we need it, then in the future we will have trouble. So yeah, this is why we need to protect the environment. Okay, we need to realize that destroying nature, destroying and not caring about things also affects us in the long run. Well, number three is more of the moral and ethical side of things. We need to allow the indigenous population to preserve its own cultural values and continue staying in a well-protected environment, not kicking them out and exploiting their land, Malaysia. We also have a responsibility as human beings to conserve beauty for its aesthetic value. So this crosses over to the fourth reason, aesthetics, right? It's beautiful, and don't you feel responsible? That's the idea. And we also have the responsibility to prevent extinction, because we have no right to cause these organisms to cease to exist. Who are we to determine life or death, essentially? I feel like humans feel the extra responsibility, other than, the dog or cats or your pets at home. It's because we do have increased intellect compared to, other species. So there is a sense of responsibility that we have to feel, to protect the environment with our intellect. And also, humans are the one causing major destruction around now. So shouldn't we take responsibility for our own actions and our effects on the environment? But okay, so this moral and ethical reasons part can go quite deep, can quite religious or philosophical, actually. But I won't go there. I'll let you go and explore. This is the extent you need to write in your exams. This is the extent. Okay. Alright, so yeah, with that, there is the need that's why we need to maintain biodiversity. Now, just a few notes on the need for conservation. Very often when it comes to conservation, we think of protecting just one species. The first thought that comes into my mind, okay, instinctively when it comes to conservation is like, oh, we need to protect pandas and orangutans and tigers, yeah, and rhinos, yeah, and it's always these like really big, wonderful mammals and species, and yeah, they are beautiful and they do need to be protected, but there are also needs to protect especially certain species and identify keystone species. Okay, keystone is basically like this stone here in like the arc. So if you remove it, then it will all collapse. Okay, and the other word for it is cornerstone. I think you all know cornerstone much better here. And basically the idea of a keystone species is really that if you remove it, it will cause significant impact on the ecosystem. It is what holds everything together. So other than the big species that we always talk about, we need to especially protect keystone species. For example, the honeybee, which is one keystone species that's receiving a lot of attention nowadays, is an important pollinator for many plants, vegetables, and crops. And it's natural, but because of the increased use of pesticides and habitat loss and maybe not or pollution, the honeybee population has dropped in numbers, and therefore it's a little bit problematic right now. So yeah, this is what the UK and US especially are actively trying to increase. So they are actually building bee farms around normal vegetable and crop farms in order to help the population. But of course, there's not individual species that need conservation. So it's the large, beautiful mammals as well as keystone species, but it's not really just the species that needs protection, but the whole ecosystem needs to be protected as well, because as we know, ecosystem is an interaction between different components in the environment, right? So if you want to save one, you need to save all. And if you damage one, you damage all. So when we want to conserve one, we would want to conserve the whole thing as well, improve on every aspect. So in the terms of honeybee, we don't want to just increase honeybees. We want to increase the flowers it needs to survive. We want to decrease pesticide use. We want to decrease pollution of the air, maybe, to make sure that honeybee can survive. So the whole ecosystem needs conserving, not just the individual species. The whole habitat needs to be protected. But as you can imagine, this is quite a difficult task. There is a lot of thought and a lot of aspects to be taken into account when it comes to conservation efforts. And this will be only possible if individuals, local groups, national and international organizations all work together. Okay, each of us, okay, need to actually do our responsibility, and this would be at all levels as well, locally, in our town, in our city, nationally, and a global level. So at all levels. Which leads us to our next point here. This is the focus of your syllabus. We're not going to explore each and every level. We're going to focus on the roles of NGOs in conservation and how they contribute to protecting the environment. Yeah, so in general, NGOs like WWF, Greenpeace, Oceana, and there are a few more here that you can see in the slides, many more out there. In general, all these NGOs play a role to conserve species and biodiversity and prevent extinction. Okay, and they do this by promoting coexistence of wildlife and people, so saying that people and wildlife can exist together in a sustainable manner. To educate and raise awareness, their role is to raise funds and donations to go towards conservation efforts and education, even to hold protests or take direct action towards conserving the environment, preventing some development or exploitation. and in general just influence people, governments, businesses to do the right thing for the environment. Yeah, and maybe even influence governments to have laws to ban or reduce hunting, polluting, oil drilling, mining and deforestation, all sorts of human activities that might damage the environment. So yeah, these are NGOs. The ones that are highlighted in your syllabus is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Greenpeace, Oceana. These are the ones that are very famous. Of course, there are many others, but these few, you gotta remember a few examples, okay? Okay, so other than those things, there are a few especially important international NGOs that we need to talk about here. Number one is what you know already, IUCN. IUCN stands for the International Union of Conservation of Nature, something like that. Now, they are the global authority on the status of the environment and conservation. They are sort of like the WHO, but for conservation and environment. And what they are most famous for is to monitor and categorize threatened and endangered species. So I just wanted to encourage you to visit the IUCN Red List website and just look at and just like Google, like just search up like an organism you are interested in and look at the results. So we can see here that the categories would be in this few one. This is how they categorize according to color. So not evaluated and data deficient, they don't really look at. The ones where they have adequate data for, they actually categorize it in these categories. Green means least concern, LC, near threatened. Vulnerable, endangered, and critical endangered is a scale. And of course there's extinct and extinct in the wild, so only present in captivity. And they have abbreviations for each as well as color coding. So incredible organization. It soothes my OCD soul. This is my search result after I just searched tuna because I'm thinking of sashimi. But actually a lot of tuna is facing some problems. Right here is near threatened, least concern, so not a problem, but tuna such as like bluefin tuna, let me just search it up for you. Waiting, like the Pacific bluefin tuna, the Atlantic bluefin tuna, which is such a prize tuna, is huge and apparently is really nice. Highly sought after in Japan. Is critically endangered. This, what does EN mean again? Endangered, and is endangered, this critical endangered. What's VU? Vulnerable. So you can see this is all problematic. So yeah, like search it up, read their FAQ. It's incredibly interesting and it's incredibly fascinating how much work went into this website. And if you click on each animal, you can see the scale, beautiful graphics, geographic range, and all the research that they have on it. Crazy amount of work, but amazing. Yeah, so check the website out, okay? The next important international NGO is this particular thing. Okay, this is not really it's not really a company, it's not really you know, a club or society sort of thing. It is actually a agreement. It's a convention on international trade in endangered species of wild fauna and flora, or in short, CITES. So CITES is actually an international agreement between governments, trade agreement law between governments. This is actually like voluntary, so different nations would sign up to join it. It's international, and they all would agree on implementing some laws in order to protect the environment. So this is really to regulate or legislate for trade in wild species and prevent international trade of certain endangered species or even animal products. And they actually have a list of those species and bans those organisms, those species, from being sold in the market. IUCN informs those key decisions at the CITES conferences, so they are related to each other, but they're not the same thing. So remember, IUCN is the red list thing, okay? It categorizes threatened and endangered species, whereas CITES, which is a common past year question, comes up quite often, is trade agreement law. It's a trade agreement law, and it prevents international trade of endangered species or animal products. So yeah, that's the important international NGOs. Now the next question, next part of what we're going to look at here is particular threats to biodiversity. We need to know the threats in order to know how to conserve, don't we? So let's start with the first one here. Lack of human education. It is a threat. The cause and effect is not in your syllabus. It's a joke, but it's also true. Alright, how can you not know what you're doing affects the environment? It's ignorance, or greed, maybe, one. And the effect is just stupidity of actions, as you will see as we go along. Anyways, yeah, that is a problem. Let's go into other threats. Bear in mind that we are looking at aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, meaning that we're looking at land and sea and water, okay? Water and land. So both these areas. So when we answer, when you look at these points here, they cover both. Okay, the second threat here is habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is the idea of habitats becoming, a big habitat becoming small, okay, it becomes smaller areas, and basically you're splitting one big patch into a couple of small ones, like this. And that's a problem because it becomes smaller, right? It means there's loss of breeding sites, maybe, it might be increased distance to find food for some animals, and you are making the gene pool smaller, okay, because the large population is actually divided to smaller populations. What could be the cause of this? The cause of this is mostly deforestation when it comes to forests. Deforestation is often done to clear land for agriculture or housing or maybe industries. And one of the most serious causes of deforestation, especially in Southeast Asia, is palm oil plantations. The planting of palm oil trees has caused many forests to be destroyed. Here's a video to show you how crazy.
There's a good chance you're not familiar with it, even though you'll find it in many of the products you use every day. It's in everything, from makeup and toothpaste to donuts, chocolate bars, and in some countries, biodiesel fuel. It goes by many names, but it's most commonly known as palm oil. Global consumption of palm oil has quintupled since 1990. Oil derived from the palm fruit is easy to extract, has a higher yield than other types of vegetable oils, and can be used in dozens of products. But the proliferation of palm oil also poses a massive environmental threat. Each year, palm oil plantations destroy millions of acres of forested land, create billions of tons of carbon pollution, and kill endangered wildlife. All of this makes the palm oil industry one of the worst environmental offenders on the planet. In 2015, over 62,000 square miles around the world, much of it former forests, were committed to palm oil plantations. That's an area 4 times the size of Switzerland. Palm oil is one of the top 3 drivers of deforestation in Indonesia, a country that supplies more than half of global demand. Each year in Indonesia, fires are set to clear forested lands to make way for palm oil production. Just last year, over 10,000 square miles were torched, creating fires so big they could be seen from outer space. All of this unleashes massive amounts of carbon into the air. Fires in 2015 added more than 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The burning of forests to clear land for plantations threatens the 10,000 square mile Luso ecosystem in Sumatra, the largest intact swath of rainforest in Southeast Asia. It's home to hundreds of unique species and is the only place left in the world where orangutans, rhinos, tigers, bears, and elephants live side by side. But their home is disappearing around them. The Sumatran tiger and the Sumatran rhino are threatened with extinction. Only a few hundred of each species exist in the wild, and their habitats are often in the path of land clearing. In Borneo, there has been a 50% decrease in orangutan populations in the past 65 years. This is a direct result of the forest fires and conversion of woodlands for palm oil cultivation. Alongside logging and mining, land clearing for agriculture is currently one of the leading causes of deforestation. If consumers don't demand more sustainable practices soon, the products we buy can and will contribute to the loss of the world's rainforests. You can help by purchasing products that do not contain palm oil, or if they do, were made sustainably. Go to takepart.com/palm oil for more information.
So that's how palm oil plantations have really affected the environment, and it's really a serious problem. And I just want to say that the solution here is not to boycott or destroy those plantations, because those plantations are already there. It's already been destroyed. So the solution here is to either find alternatives and slowly switch over, or to really make full use of the palm oil plantations we have now. So making the industry more sustainable, other than keep on clearing land. Okay, so just use the land you have now properly. So yeah, that's palm oil plantations and deforestation. Let's talk about trawling. Trawling destroys seabeds. Okay, here's a better diagram to show you trawling. So basically, a ship actually lowers the net. The net has some weights at the bottom, some floats on the top, so it stays open, and so it can scoop up amount of fish. But the problem is that the trawler actually destroys the seabed. So actually it sort of scoops up the corals and destroys the sand and the plants growing at the bottom of the sea as well. And that's really bad, because there is also habitat destruction. This is where the fish live and breed and eat. And again, if you destroy one part of the environment, you are affecting the whole food web. And actually, overfishing and trawling is one of the biggest problems when it comes to aquatic ecosystems and aquatic animals, more than anything, honestly. So yeah, that's a problem, trawling. Other than that, reclaim land, so land filling in order to expand the island would really result in habitat loss as well. As you know, well, the sea actually gets deeper and deeper the further out you go from the coast, right? And this area here is actually where a lot of corals live, and a lot of fish that we eat live in this pelagic zone here. And this is the area where sunlight can penetrate through and organisms can live. So yeah, when you are doing land reclamation, so you're actually filling this entire area up with soil, making the land on top more visible. But actually what you're doing is you're killing all these animals that can live in this region. And as a result, corals and seabeds will be destroyed. So yeah, that's reclaim land and how it causes habitat loss, and that clearing of riverbanks might cause that as well. This refers to the clearing of organisms at the riverbanks itself, and this actually results in less trees and bushes around the riverbanks, maybe because humans want to use that area and build houses near the riverbank, and actually that causes a lot of soil erosion and habitat loss as well. Okay, next threat. The next threat is overexploitations of resources. Now this one should be familiar to you. This is the OG hunting, poaching, fishing, removal of plants. For what? For food, for sport, for medicine, for decoration, for selling, for trading. Even grazing by cattle, destroying plants is actually overexploitation of resources in the sense of plants. Okay, and all these really causes just decrease in numbers of that particular species. And there's more. So climate change is a huge problem. It's very, very real. I'm not covering everything in detail here, so please feel free to go and Google and YouTube more things. Anyways, climate change is mostly caused by the emissions of greenhouse gases. This includes carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, carbon monoxide, which is not in this list, that written here, and chlorofluorocarbons. And CFCs are from air cons mostly, okay, the old ones especially, but CO2 and CO is from combustions of fossil fuels, and manual of domestic livestock results in methane. Okay, all these things results in greenhouse gases, which would then cause the greenhouse effect and global warming. What do we mean by global warming and greenhouse effect? What we mean is this, yeah. So usually when the sun is shining on the earth, right, which is always, there are radiation that is reflected, and there is radiation that passes through the atmosphere to give the earth warmth, right? But because of greenhouse gases at the atmosphere, what is supposed to be bounced off and get out doesn't go out, so it bounces back into, and less of it bounces out. So if the greenhouse gases get more, this means a lot of the radiation from the sun, the infrared radiation, is going to bounce just to the earth and back. Over time, this would result in increased heat on the earth, and therefore global warming. So temperatures and climates now are warmer than it used to be like 10-20 years ago. Your parents would say the same thing, especially in Malaysia, apparently. Yeah, so that's global warming. Can you imagine if these CFCs, okay, especially destroy the ozone layer as well? So this makes the ozone layer thinner. It means more heat can enter, and because of greenhouse gases, it cannot escape. So that's a problem, and therefore this causes ice caps at the North Pole and South Pole to melt. So decrease in area of ice sheets would happen and causes rising sea levels. And this is a problem because not only organisms will be affected due to change in sea temperature, so it become warmer as well, and decrease in oxygen concentration because there's more water now. Other than those problems, is bad for us because rising sea levels means disappearing islands. Okay, it would affect the amount of land we have. And in addition to all this, the climate doesn't only become warmer in some sense, it also becomes more unpredictable and extreme due to all these greenhouse gases. So yeah, that is a threat there. Now, other threats include increase in pollution or waste. Now, pollution and waste is actually a huge problem. One of the biggest causes, one of the biggest, most dramatic ones is oil spills. Okay, so you know, we extract oil from the ground, okay, and this can sometimes explode when there's something wrong, when it's been hit by a hurricane and cause oil spills. And this oil rig explosion in the Gulf of Mexico is one of the worst cases that we have in our current generation. It happened in 2010, but actually it has been leaking since 2004, and 4.9 million barrels of crude oil spilled. I cannot even imagine how much that is. And basically, this created like a oil layer on top of the sea, and this stopped sunlight and oxygen from getting into the water. So a lot of fish has died. It covered a lot of islands nearby with oil because of the oil washed up shore, and therefore a lot of plants on the islands have died as well. And I'm just going to show you a video here to show you how bad it was.
Oysters. From Florida to Texas, they are the Gulf of Mexico's gold. For thousands of people along the coast, oysters mean jobs, money, a decent living. At least they used to. This is Bon Secour Fisheries in Alabama. Nearly every day, sack after sack of oysters is shucked, sorted, and processed.
And that's what this line over here was producing.
Chris Nelson runs the company.
This is a pretty ideal oyster. You think about the palm of your hand, and it's what's going to have a reasonably good size oyster meat in it.
Yeah. Business is better now, but not what it once was. 5 years ago, all of it, the jobs, the income, the company, nearly evaporated.
Like I said, we feel very fortunate, but it was economically as close as I want to have a near-death experience ever.
In the spring of 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 workers were killed. For more than 80 days, until the well was plugged, oil gushed into the Gulf. More than 200 million gallons of it. Oil giant BP was held responsible. Beaches, marshes, and wildlife were covered in it. 80,000 square miles of commercial and recreational fishing grounds were closed for months until scientists could determine the fish, oysters, shrimp, and crabs were safe to eat. 80% of Chris Nelson's business was suddenly gone. These days, while they are on the road to recovery, Nelson is always looking over his shoulder, so to speak, because he says, you don't know what you don't know.
What I don't know is there something that we're not seeing, or some sort of effect that we wouldn't see for years afterward that, next year or the year after we're going to begin to notice it.
Nelson is far from alone in his concern. Robert Kraft is mayor of Gulf Shores, Alabama, just 30 minutes away.
I think we still don't know what extent environmental damage we may have out there. The juvenile of the species, were they affected? Is there mutations that we're going to have to deal with? Will future fish and oyster and shrimp populations and crab populations, will it be damaged? We don't know.
For now, the good times have returned. Traffic is bumper to bumper. The beaches once covered in oil are now covered with tourists lounging in the surf, building sand castles, and just relaxing with a line in the water, hoping for a bite. Tourism is the lifeblood of Gulf Shores. After the spill, that blood turned to oil. Did you believe at the time that you'd ever get out of that mess?
When it first happened, I thought our world had changed forever and we'd never be the same. Because you look at that mass of oil on our beach, you think, how in the world are we ever going to recover this? How's our environment going to recover? How's our business going to recover? I thought we were basically doomed at that point in time. I would have never imagined we would be this far, this fast.
There are still lingering reminders of the spill, says Kraft. Just offshore, out of sight and beneath the waves, there is, says the mayor, a mat of oil mixed with sand resting on the bottom. Periodically, when the wind blows hard and the big waves roll in, so do the tar balls.
Every time we have a churned up surf, we get pieces of oil on our beach. Tar balls break off and come to the beach. We'll have that forever.
Now, after 5 years, the mayor has had time to reflect and has what you would call an interesting take on the spill. If it had to happen, he's glad it was BP, a company with very deep pockets.
I can say it now. In the heat of the battle, I wasn't willing to, but in reality, we're lucky that BP was the one that had this damage, because any smaller entity wouldn't have had the money.
And BP needed plenty of it. During the past 5 years, it has spent about $30 billion on cleanup costs, claims, settlements. The company says it spent $1.3 billion so far on 240 environmental studies. Water and sediment samples, BP says, show only minimal lingering effects. In its 5-year report, the oil giant said, quote, areas that were affected are recovering, and data BP collected and analyzed to date do not indicate a significant long-term impact to the population of any Gulf species. BP has also spent millions on advertising to help communities recover from the negative impact and to recover its own image.
I care deeply about the Gulf. I grew up in Louisiana. I went to school here. I've been with BP ever since. Today, I lead a team that sets our global safety standards. After the spill, we made two commitments: to help the Gulf recover and become a safer company. We've worked hard to honor both.
Well, BP clearly has both a public relations and a financial reason to say that everything's hunky-dory and not to worry about what's going on in the Gulf.
Raleigh Hoke is campaign director for the Gulf Restoration Network, a watchdog group based in New Orleans, Louisiana.
But we're over 5 years later, and our communities and our environment are still seeing impacts from BP's oil. Every time we go out to certain areas of coastal Louisiana, we see tar balls washing up on our shores.
More money is clearly needed and more cash is coming. BP and the 5 coastal states of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida have reached a settlement over environmental and economic damages from the spill. If approved by a U.S. federal judge, over the next decade and a half, BP will pay out nearly $19 billion to the states and local governments. The spill will have cost the oil company a whopping $50 billion.
So this money really is going to be able to jumpstart restoration plans here in Louisiana. By no means is it going to solve everything, but it can get these plans moving in a real way.
Wilbert Collins and his son Tracy hope the money can somehow solve the oyster crisis. There just aren't as many as there used to be. Wilbert's face and hands are weathered. Age and years on the sun-drenched water will do that to a man. For generations, the family has harvested oysters in Louisiana, but these days, they're not seeing the babies needed to replenish the stock.
Every once in a while, you might have had a year or two that you might have had problems, but now we're going on like 3-4 years of not seeing those babies coming back,
No one is quite sure where to pin the blame. Was it hurricanes, the spill, or too much fresh water that upset the delicate balance oysters need to grow? The Collins family is getting by for now, but they worry, will the oysters ever come back?
We're just wondering for the future, you know what I mean? That's the main question now. What the future has in store for the business, the industry.
Don't know.
Don't know. If we knew, that would be the ticket.
This is Port Fourchon, Louisiana. After the spill, the entire beach from one end to the other was covered in oil. Today, you can find the occasional tar ball, but for the most part, the oil is all gone. We found a chunk the size of a pancake. It was like a flat piece of black licorice. Of course, just by looking at it, there's no way to know where it came from. But if tar mats and tar balls are the worst of the long-term impacts, Wendell Curall can live with that.
Now, did it do damage? Absolutely. The animals that were here when it happened, terrible. Are there some residuals? Probably. But all in all, this is a lot better than I had hoped for.
Curall is general manager of the levee district that takes in Port Fourchon. If it can be said, and this may be a stretch, that anything good came out of the spill, it's the nearly $7 billion Louisiana will get from the settlement with BP. Coastal wetlands the size of a football field are disappearing every hour. The marshes have been eroding away for decades, long before the oil took its toll.
We've lost over 1,900 square miles since 1930. That's the size of Delaware, okay? With this money, we're going to use it to really start up our master plan in reestablishing and at least maintaining what's left.
You need look no further than Port Fourchon for the staggering evidence of coastal erosion. Imagine this. 60 years ago, Curall says, the beach was where one of the oil rigs is now perched.
Well, that's where the beach was.
The beach was there.
The beach has eroded from 56 to today to this point. So we lost a quarter of a mile.
That's a quarter of a mile.
My dad was born in 1930. The beach was about 9/10 of a mile further out than it is today.
And today, platforms dot the horizon. During Cural's lifetime, the industry has always been here. That won't change, he says.
This port right behind us supports 92% of the drilling in the Gulf.
Cural is blunt. Without the port and the oil, the United States energy demands can't be satisfied.
Okay, look, you ever watch Naked and Afraid?
Yeah.
Okay, you cut off the oil supply for 6 months to this country and not have any oil and not produce any oil. We're naked and afraid, okay?
So, despite the spill, oil and gas is still the ticket in Louisiana. Not even the worst offshore oil disaster in U.S. history could alter that. In the shadows of the big rigs, fishermen troll the waters again. Birds look to spot a meal swimming beneath them. The tourists have returned to the Gulf beaches. Suntan oil has replaced crude oil. But it will be years, perhaps decades, before everyone here is willing to sound the all clear. Because the bottom line is, you just don't know what you don't know.
Okay, so you saw how it really affected not only the fish and on the island, but also birds and predators that depend on the sea, and a lot of them were covered in oil. And that video just now was 5 years after the oil rig explosion, and until this day, oil spill is still being cleaned up and still affecting a lot of organisms and species. Yeah, so this really results in habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, and a decrease in numbers. Oil spill is just an example of pollution. Pollution is also caused by increased use of pesticides, which will kill other insects that might be beneficial. Insecticides and pesticides are about the same thing. Fertilizers is a problem as well because fertilizers contain chemicals, and these chemicals can leach. Okay, that means they are soluble in water, and they can actually wash into the soil. It could mix into the soil, it could wash into the water. And yeah, that would cause soil acidification, it would cause water pollution near the farms. Mining also produces a lot of waste and digs deep into the ground, producing a lot of problems as well. Plastic is a huge problem. Plastic is so hard to break down, it has such a long half-life, and therefore if you look at the news, we are all really trying really hard to break down plastic as fast as possible and reduce plastic use in many areas of life. So yeah, these are some threats. Here's more. There's one more thing, which is probably most unheard of to normal people, but now you know because you're a bio student. Humans, other than all the activities and pollution stuff that we do, often introduce invasive alien species that outcompete native ones. We like to take things from other places that we found and bring them back to the new place we live. This results in increased competition for the local species and maybe even increase in predators, grazers, or spread of disease. Now, the problem with alien species is that in its non-natural environment, these alien species do not have natural predators in the environment. The environment might be more abundant with the alien species, of abundant resources for the alien species, and the alien species might be stronger or better than the native ones and therefore take over their land. And this is very true with gray squirrels brought from US to Europe. So gray squirrels that you feed in parks, if you've been to UK before, they're actually not from there, they are from the US, and yeah, they actually have really affected the native red squirrels, which is very rare now, and I think I've only seen one in my 3 years in the UK, and that was like in somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, like way up north. So yeah, it's larger, it outcompetes red squirrels for food, and it carries a squirrel pox virus, and the gray squirrel is not affected really, but it is a carrier for the red squirrel, so they really cannot be in the same place. If not, the red squirrel will die. So this would really cause a decrease in numbers, inbreeding due to the small population of the red squirrel, and all these problems here that we always, using the language that we always use when it comes to inbreeding. Here's the video, enjoy.
Britain's iconic red squirrel is in trouble. The problem, the invasive eastern gray squirrel, brought to England from North America about 140 years ago. Wealthy collectors in the 19th century liked to keep gray squirrels as pets or release them onto their estates as kind of a living lawn ornament. In fact, there's genetic evidence that all of the gray squirrels in Ireland are descended from 6 pairs sent as a wedding gift. The gray squirrel is bad news for the native red squirrels because they outcompete them for food and habitat. Worst of all, grays carry a virus called squirrelpox. It doesn't harm the gray squirrels, or people for that matter, but it is deadly to the reds. The many conservation groups working to save the red squirrel have had some successes. Gray squirrels have been eradicated from the Isle of Anglesey. It took 18 years, but now the island's red squirrels are on the rebound. And there is hope that nature may help. The pine marten, a relative of weasels, is a native predator. Scientists in Ireland have noticed an intriguing pattern. Where pine martens show up, the population of gray squirrels declines, and red squirrels start to recover. It may be that red squirrels, which evolved with the pine marten, are better able to escape these tree-climbing predators. The future of the red squirrel is looking brighter in the UK, but there's still much to be done. The lesson for other countries is to prevent gray squirrels from arriving at all, or getting rid of them as quickly as possible, and to definitely not give them as wedding presents.
So with that, that's it for the threats to biodiversity. That's the end of this video. Just remember that the threats and the knowledge you have learned here is not to be memorized, but it's conceptual. It is very based on general knowledge. So the more you read, the more you watch videos on this topic, the better. So yeah, I'll see you next video. Bye!